Okay, this starts Deuteronomy. This is a little subsection before the bulk of the reading, I guess. So I'm just gonna start. It's kind of long. It's like 5 pages. Called the Ten Commandments: The Basis for a Free and Civilized Society. Deuteronomy 5. It is difficult to argue that any single work has had a greater or more far reaching impact through 4 centuries of American life, law, and culture than the Ten Commandments. As such, the fact that their public display would become a matter of current debate or prohibition is almost unthinkable, and yet it is. As noted in the commentary on Exodus 20, the Ten Commandments are an embodiment of the moral law, one of the 4 types of law in the Bible, and formed the foundation for general morals in America as encompassed by the common law. The repetition here in Deuteronomy 5 provides an opportunity to demonstrate that they were also the impetus for many specific American statutory laws. The original delivery of the commandments in Exodus was to the children of Israel immediately after God had delivered them from Egypt and established them as an independent nation. Now they are being repeated to the younger generation some 40 years later as they are preparing to finally enter the promised land. After suffering the delay and the pain of watching their parents perish in the wilderness because of their continual disobedience and refusal to enter, it's Numbers 14:29, Moses is renewing the covenant with them. The Ten Commandments are not mere dictates of obligations. They are life-giving promises that, if adhered to, would bring blessing and prosperity. God promised that it would go well with them and they would prolong their days in the land that they were about to possess. Such promise was not lost upon our founding fathers, who openly endorsed the application of the Ten Commandments to civil law in America. Founding father John Quincy Adams declared, "The law given from Sinai was a civil and municipal as well as moral and religious code. It contained many statutes of universal application, laws essential to the existence of men in society, and most of which have been enacted by every nation which ever professed any code of laws." Founding father Noah Webster agreed. Where will you find any code of laws among civilized men in which the commands and prohibitions are not founded in Christian principles? I need not specify the prohibition of murder, robbery, theft, trespass. These laws are essential to the existence of men in society, and yet some critics today would object to displaying the commandments on such spurious grounds that there are too many versions, that the Lutherans had a version, as do the Jewish, Catholic, and Orthodox faith, and that the Protestants have several different versions. They thus argue that with so many different versions, public displays of any of them will always invoke a deep theological dispute and therefore should be avoided. But this claim is ridiculous. What distinguishes the various versions are primarily the different ways in which they are numbered. In the original Hebrew text, the Ten Commandments appear in paragraph form, with no numbers or verses. But as they were translated into subsequent texts, various faiths and branches of Christianity, chose to number them differently. For example, the first commandment in the Jewish version is usually the prologue in most Protestant versions, but both contain the same content. The different numberings are merely superficial man-made contrivances for ease of identification, but all versions cover the same subject matter. Yet no matter how the commandments are numbered, each finds direct application in American laws. A few such examples, chosen from dozens of similar ones, are presented below. Number 1. Have no other gods. This commandment was directly incorporated into the first written code of laws enacted in America, those of the Virginia colony in 1610, the subsequent Massachusetts legal code of 1641, and that of Connecticut in 1642, similarly declared, if any man after legal conviction shall have or worship any other God but the Lord God, he shall be put to death. Deuteronomy 13:6, 10, Deuteronomy 17:2, 6, and Exodus 22 or 20. Yeah. Oh, all right. 2. Have no idols. Typical of the civil laws on this command was a 1680 New Hampshire law declaring idolatry. It is enacted by ye assembly and ye authority thereof. Yet if any person having had the knowledge of the true God openly or manifestly have or worship any other God but the Lord God, he shall be put to death. Exodus 22:20, Deuteronomy 13:6 and 10. Note: reading such early statutes and the ones that follow can give the impression that the death penalty was freely applied to almost any crime in America, but such was not the case. This fact becomes apparent when comparing American laws with the European counterparts from the same period. As affirmed by early American historian Daniel Dorker, Dorchester, when the Mayflower left England in 1620, 31 offenses were punishable with death in the mother country. By the middle of that century, the blacklist had enlarged to 223, of which 176 were without the benefit of the clergy. There were no exceptions. How far in advance the New England colonies were is evident from the fact that not a single colony code recognized more than 15 capital crimes. That might still strike us as severe, but when understood in context, realize that having a copy of the scriptures for themselves in their own language to study and learn what God was like as revealed in His Word was a relatively new development. Prior to this, the Bible was actually kept from the people so as to keep them ignorant and easily controlled by those in power who regularly committed horrible atrocities in God's name. Given that, it was quite remarkable just how quickly these early forefathers began to learn for themselves that God was not like those who had misrepresented him for their own aims. For a more complete discussion of this subject, please see the commentary for Psalm 119:11. 3. Honor God's name. Civil laws based on this commandment were divided into two categories. 1. Laws prohibiting swearing and profanity, and 2. Laws prohibiting blasphemy. Noah Webster affirmed that both were derived from this commandment. When in obedience to the third commandment of the Decalogue, you would avoid profane swearing. You are to remember that this alone is not a full compliance with the prohibition, which comprehends all irreverent words or actions and whatever tends to cast contempt on the Supreme Being or on His word and ordinances, i.e., blasphemy. Numerous statutory laws were enacted as a result of the third command. Number 4. Honor the Sabbath day. From the beginning, every American colony enacted civil laws to honor the Sabbath. That legal recognition continued over subsequent centuries. For example, during the American Revolution, Commander-in-Chief George Washington issued numerous military orders directing that the Sabbath be observed. The Commander-in-Chief directs that divine service be performed every Sunday at 11 o'clock. It is expected that officers of all ranks will by their attendance set an example to their men. Following the Revolution, the states continued to honor the Sabbath. For example, Vermont enacted a 10-part Sabbath law in 1787. Massachusetts enacted an 11-part law in 1791. Virginia enacted an extensive 8-part law written by Thomas Jefferson in 1792. Jersey enacted a 21-part law in 1798. New Hampshire enacted a 14-part law in 1799. Maine enacted a 13-part law in 1821, and other states did the same. When the U.S. Constitution was written in 1787, it too honored the traditional Christian Sabbath Article 1, Section 7, Paragraph 2 stipulates that the president has 10 days to sign a law, Sundays accepted. Yeah, this Sundays accepted clause had previously appeared in the state constitutions, and so the historical understandings of this clause at both the state and federal levels was summarized by numerous courts, including the 1912 Supreme Court of Missouri. It is provided that if the governor does not return a bill within 10 days, Sundays accepted. Yeah, it's accepted. EXCEPTED. Can any impartial mind deny that it contains a recognition of the Lord's Day as a day exempted? Okay, so why did I do accepted? EXCEPTED and then exempted EXEMPTED. All right, sorry. I'm going to start that over. Just kind of pisses me off. Can any impartial mind deny that it contains a recognition of the Lord's Day as a day exempted by law from all worldly pursuits? The framers of the Constitution then recognized Sunday as a day to be observed, acting themselves under a law which exacted a compulsive observance of it. Sunday was recognized as a day of rest. Other courts were equally candid about Sabbath laws and their relation to the Ten Commandments. For example, in 1950, the Supreme Court of Mississippi affirmed the Sunday laws have a divine origin. After the 6 days of creation, the Creator himself rested on the seventh. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 and 3. Thus the Sabbath was instituted as a day of rest. The original example was later confirmed as a commandment when the law was handed down from Mount Sinai. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Exodus 28. In 1967, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania I can't say that word, declared, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. Deuteronomy 5:12-14. This divine pronouncement became part of the common law inherited by the 13 American colonies and by the sovereign states of the American Union. Modern U.S. Supreme Court affirms that even to this day, states have the right to enact laws honoring the Sabbath. Number 5, honor thy parents. A 1642 Connecticut law specifically cited the Decalogue as the basis for its civil laws related to honoring parents. If any child or children above 16 years old and of sufficient understanding shall curse or smite their normal father or mother, he or they shall be put to death unless it can be sufficiently testified that the parents have been very unchristianly negligent in the education of such children, or so provoke them by extreme and cruel correction that they have been forced thereunto to preserve themselves from death or maiming. Exodus 21:17, Leviticus 20, Exodus 20:12. 3 centuries later, a 1934 Louisiana appeals court affirmed the continuing influence of the fifth command on civil laws. Honor thy father and mother is as much a command of the municipal law as it is a part of the Decalogue regarded as holy by every Christian people. A child, says the code, whatever be his age, owes honor and respect to his mother and father. 6. Do not murder. A 1641 Massachusetts law declared. Exodus 21:12, Numbers 35:13, 14, 30, and 31. If any person commit any willful murder, which is manslaughter, committed upon premeditated malice, hatred, or cruelty, not in a man's necessary and just defense, nor a mere causality casualty against his will, he shall be put to death. Exodus 21:14. Any person shall slay another through guile, either by poisoning or other such devilish practice, he shall be put to death. Similar provisions derived from the prohibition in the Ten Commandments can be found in the laws of the early colonies, subsequently of the independent states, laws spanning the centuries. Consequently, courts have been very candid in acknowledging the Decalogue as the origin of American civil murder laws, such as when a 1932 Kentucky appeals court affirmed, following the promulgation of Moses at Mount Sinai, has required of each and every one of its citizens that thou shalt not murder. Exodus 20:13. If that law is violated, the one guilty of it has no right to demand more than a fair trial, and if, as a result thereof, the severest punishment for the crime is visited upon him, he has no one to blame but himself. All right. 7. Do not commit adultery. Directly citing the Decalogue, a 1641 Massachusetts law declared, if any person committeth adultery with a married or espoused wife, the adulterer and adulteress shall surely be put to death. Exodus 20:14. For 3 centuries, colonies and states based their adultery policies on the Decalogue. For example, a 1787 Vermont law stated, whereas the violation of the marriage covenant is contrary to the command of God, Exodus 20:14, and destructive to the peace of families, be it therefore enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Vermont that if any man be found in bed with another man's wife or woman with another's husband, etc., wait a minute. I don't like how that was left. Give me 1 second. Let me reread that. For 3 centuries, colonies and states based their adultery policies on the Decalogue. For example, a 1787 Vermont law stated, whereas the violation of the marriage covenant is contrary to the command of God, Exodus 20:14, and destructive to the peace of families, be it therefore enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Vermont that if any man be found in bed with another man's wife, or woman with another's husband, and that's all it says. It doesn't give me the explanation, but I'll keep reading. We'll see. In 1898, the highest criminal court in Texas declared, thou shalt not commit adultery is our law as well as the law of the Bible. And in 1955, the Washington Supreme Court likewise affirmed adultery, whether promiscuous or not, violates one of the Ten Commandments and the statutes of the state. 8. Do not steal. Early colonial laws are easily cited for evidence of the Decalogue's influence on this prohibition, but consider more recent declarations, such as from the 1951 Louisiana Supreme Court, which acknowledged in the Ten Commandments the basic law of all Christian countries is found the admonition, thou shalt not steal. In 1940, the Supreme Court of California had similarly declared, thou shalt not steal applies with equal force and propriety to the industrialist of a complex civilization as to the simple herdsman of ancient Israel. And in 1914, a federal court acknowledged that the Constitution's takings clause prohibiting a government seizure of private property was an embodiment of the Decalogue's 8th commandment against theft, including government theft. Good. 9. Do not perjure yourself. A 1642 Connecticut law declared, if any man rise up by false witness, wittingly and of purpose to take away any man's life, he shall be put to death. Deuteronomy 19:16, 18, 19. For over 3 centuries, civil laws against perjury were openly acknowledged to be derived from the Decalogue, as when the 1924 Oregon Supreme Court declared, no official is above the law. Thou shalt not bear false witness is a command of the Decalogue, and that forbidden act is denounced by statute as a felony. Number 10, do not covet. The 10th commandment actually forms the basis for many of the prohibitions given in the other commandments. That is, a violation of this commandment frequently precedes a violation of others, particularly the command against stealing, as William Penn, the framer of the original laws of Pennsylvania, acknowledged. He that covets can no more be a moral man than he that steals, since he does so in his mind. Nor can he be one that robs his neighbor of his credit, or that craftily undermines him of his trade or office. Founding Father John Adams also acknowledged the importance of this commandment, declaring, the moment the idea is admitted into society that property is not as sacred as the laws of God, and that there is not a force of law and public justice to protect it, anarchy and tyranny commence. If thou shalt not covet and thou shalt not steal were not commandments of heaven, they must be made inviolable precepts in every society before it can be civilized or made free. Many courts have acknowledged the numerous other categories of laws to which this provision of the Decalogue directly applies. For example, in 1895, the California Supreme Court cited this prohibition as the basis of civil laws against defamation. In 1904, the Court of Appeals in West Virginia cited it as the basis of laws preventing election fraud. In 1951, the Oregon Supreme Court cited this part of the Decalogue as the basis of civil laws against modern forms of cattle rustling. And in 1958, the Florida Appeals Court cited it as the basis of laws targeting white-collar crime. There are numerous other examples affirming that this commandment of the Decalogue had a substantial influence on many other civil laws. There are hundreds more examples irrefutably demonstrating the substantial influence of the Ten Commandments on American civil law. In fact, so clear and compelling is the historical evidence that it has been consistently acknowledged by courts across America, such as when the 1917 Supreme Court of North Carolina affirmed, our laws are founded upon the Decalogue, not that every case can be exactly decided according to what is there enjoined, but we can never safely depart from this short but great declaration of moral principles without founding the law upon the sand instead of upon the eternal rock of justice and equity. In 1950, the Florida Supreme Court similarly pointed out a people unschooled about the sovereignty of God, the Ten Commandments, and the ethics of Jesus could never have evolved the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution. There is not one solitary fundamental principle of our democratic policy that did not stem directly from the basic moral concepts as embodied in the Decalogue and the ethics of Jesus. In short, the Ten Commandments not only form the basis of the moral law in America, but were also a direct influence on its civil statutory laws. The effect of the commandments produced a truly civilized society, for as a matter of civil policy, it matters not one whit if my neighbor is an atheist or opponent of Christianity, but if he will nevertheless govern his behavior by the basic values found in the Ten Commandments. That is, if he will refrain from killing me, stealing my property, or taking my wife, he will make a good citizen regardless of whether or not he holds any specific religious beliefs. As John Adams affirmed, even if the Ten Commandments were not commandments of heaven, they must be made inviolable precepts in every society before it can be civilized or made free. Yikes. That's it.